Warning, you are entering a restricted area. Return to where you came from or be destroyed.
You're heading your way towards the useless nerdy knowledge. Please do not go any further. If you will not comply, you will hear a nerd rambling.
Nerd alert!
Get those nerds!
Nerd!
Exterminate!
Go ahead, make my day.
Bazinga!
I'll be back.
Greetings, fellow podcast listeners. Welcome to another spooky episode of Useless Nerdy Knowledge. Now, since the Halloween season is around the corner, I did want to talk about, something Halloween related, but in all honesty, I didn't really know what I would, possibly talk about. I thought maybe I could talk about a movie I recently saw, or, just some other horror franchise of some kind, but I don't know. I felt like I wanted to tackle something different, so I figured, you know what? Why not just tackle some of the horror movie franchises that are also crossovers. Now, obviously, when people think of crossovers, they think of different movie properties or even show properties that merge together. Now, crossovers, aren't necessarily too common because obviously, one property is owned by another and all that copyright stuff. But when it does happen, it makes quite a lot of attention, a lot of money or a lot of views, or a lot of people just basically watch it. So I figured, I just go down the little list that I have of certain or memorable horror-related crossovers that's happened over the years. Obviously, it first started with the classic Universal monster movies with the classic Frankenstein and Dracula and Wolfman and all that stuff. Obviously, it wasn't ever really an intention to cross over together because they were different stories, probably intended to be in different, obviously with Dracula, it was written by Bram Stoker. Frankenstein was written by Mary Shelley, so they're never really intended to cross over. So even though Universal owned the rights to make and release the films, there was never really an intention to, have them meet up. But I guess it's just one of those things where probably people back in the day thought, what would happen if Dracula and Frankenstein's monster met, or even if the monster met the Wolfman, all that stuff. So, after the first Wolfman movie in 1941, obviously that, it's one of the most classic Universal monster movies alongside Dracula and Frankenstein, the Invisible Man and such. So they figured, why not have the Wolfman meet the Frankenstein monster? So in its sequel, Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, it's not, if you're expecting a huge monster brawl, you might be a bit disappointed because it's not entirely about that. It's just mainly about, Lon Chaney Jr.'s character, who, was the Wolfman in the previous film, that's trying to, basically he's trying to find Dr. Frankenstein to help him rid of this Wolfman curse that he has. But then he stumbles upon the Frankenstein monster, who's not played by Boris Karloff this time. This time he's played by Bela Lugosi. And it's kind of funny, too, because, after, I believe, Son of Frankenstein, there's a little theme where it's the Frankenstein monster is, played by different actors. And it's kind of ironic, too, because, after, the success of the first Dracula film in 1931, Universal was going to, play on making Frankenstein next. And, they wanted, they approached Bela Lugosi to be hey, would you be able to, to play the Frankenstein monster? And he turned it down. And then it's pretty ironic because, years later, quite a few years later, he would play the monster in this movie. Now, again, like I said, this isn't really much of a monster bash. It's just more of a dramatic telling and all that stuff. The monster fight mainly happens toward the end of the film. So yeah, but it's still an interesting watch just because it's a sequel to to the first Wolfman movie, and obviously it's like all the continuity with like any of these Universal monster films is just all over the place. They're not always accurate, and it's not, always on, like keeping, what do I want to say? It's just not. It's just not good with continuity. It's just not good of keeping up with like what happened in the previous film. It's like if a different writer or director was part of it, so it's like, yeah, you're probably not going to be either too pleased, or you're just going to be like really confused as to what happens. And then of course there's where it gets into the real crossovers, where it actually has all three of the monsters together. Where it, like in House of Frankenstein and House of Dracula, they have both Dracula, the Frankenstein monster, and the Wolfman. Now obviously the Wolfman is still played by Lon Chaney Jr., but every now and then the monster is played by a completely different person. And Dracula is not played by Bela Lugosi. I think Bela Lugosi only played Dracula twice, if I'm remembering correctly, because obviously he played it in the first movie, and he would reprise this role one more time, if I'm remembering correctly, in Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, and that's kind of another crossover. It's more meant to be a comedy, but they still meet the Universal monsters where all of them actually reprise the role. So yes. In that movie, Bud Abbott and Lou Costello, who were like famous comedians back in the day, basically they met the Frankenstein monster, the Wolfman, and yes, even Bela Lugosi playing Dracula. So yeah, Boris Karloff got to play the monster again. So I think that I got to see that quite a while ago. I thought it was all right. Now, of course, like if you watch comedies by today's standards, it's probably not the type of comedy movie you're used to. It's like if modern audiences were to watch the Marx Brothers movies. Like if they were able to watch like Duck Soup, Monkey Business, or even Horse Feathers, they probably wouldn't understand some of the jokes. Like obviously they would understand the slapstick because it's like almost on par with the Three Stooges. But with Abbott and Costello's comedy, it's more like comedy where you'd have to think. You got to listen to the dialogue and like think about it, because it's like their dialogue's pretty clever. Because like if I'm remembering correctly, they're like the ones that came up with that joke of like who's on first, what's on second. That old baseball joke. But they made a couple other Universal monster movies like Abbott and Costello Meet the Invisible Man and Abbott and Costello Meet the Mummy and all that stuff. I think they did a couple other ones. I'm not sure if Universal was a part of them or not, but anyway. So yeah, those are basically the main Universal monster crossovers. And of course, all those classic monsters would meet up again, even though Universal didn't have anything to do with it. In the 80s, there would be another, what I think is a pretty good crossover movie. It could have been better, but it's obviously they just wanted to do their best to try and bring all of the classic Universal monster movies together, or as many as they could. Obviously, like The Bride of Frankenstein or even The Invisible Man, unfortunately didn't make the cut. But in the 1985 movie, The Monster Squad, it's basically like if you took the Goonies and merged it with the Universal monsters. So obviously Dracula is like the main villain in there, and like his minions are the Frankenstein monster that he revives back, a Wolfman, the Gill Man, and the Mummy. Now you're probably thinking to yourself, okay, wait a minute, how does he get control of these guys? And I'll be honest, I have no idea. Now I can understand of like the Frankenstein monster serving Dracula because like he brought him back to life. It doesn't indicate where the Gill Man came from, why this random mummy from a museum decided to serve him, or why this random guy who claims that he's a werewolf, why the werewolf version of him or the Wolfman version of him serves him. I guess it's just like with Dracula's presence being around, I suppose it just like indicates that he's like the almighty unholy deity leader or something like that. I don't know. It's never explained at all. And if I'm being completely honest, basically almost all those monsters are like completely useless. Like Dracula, we can definitely understand of how powerful he is. I mean, he's an immortal undead creature, and he can do a lot of stuff. I mean, hell, he even uses dynamite for whatever reason. He has his own car because it's like, yeah, quite a real threatening killer there. And with the Frankenstein monster, I can definitely understand how he could be a good servant or slave or whatever you want to call it. The Wolfman, I guess, like if it's under the right control, makes a lot of sense too. But even like the Wolfman in the classic Universal Monster series, it was at its own will, own merits and stuff. So it didn't really have someone to serve. It was on its own survival instincts. and such. And the Gill-Man, the same thing. It's like a wild animal, basically, so I don't know why you would want to serve Dracula. And as for the Mummy, maybe there's like some sort of undead connection, but if we're being completely honest, unless you're in water and unless you're in sand or completely crippled, the Mummy and the Gill-Man are completely useless, because the Mummy just it's like wraps, get arrowed and stuck to a tree, and then basically just gets flung off the car. The Gill-Man, it literally just takes a shot of a shotgun and he's just done for. So it's unless you're under the water, you're completely vulnerable. But when you're on dry land and stuff like that, the Gill-Man is just completely useless. But I can definitely say it's really cool of how, so far, the Gill-Man has only come back once since the Monster Squad, and we still have yet to see him come back. I'm a huge fan of the Gill-Man. I really like the Gill-Man and his cool classic design, but we still have yet to have the Gill-Man in a proper movie, or even a reboot. I keep hearing that the director of Saw and Insidious is in the works, or plans to make a rebooted movie of the Creature from the Black Lagoon. So I really hope that someday he gets the respect he deserves, because ever since the failed Mummy movie with Tom Cruise of the Dark Universe and all that stuff, it just completely bombed, because the movie was terrible. The movie was stealing stuff, and it just downright didn't work. It wanted to do exactly what Marvel and DC and all these other crossover movies were trying to do at the time, where it was look, we got all these Easter eggs, we're going to put the Universal Monster movies together, but whoever wrote and directed it clearly just didn't exactly know how to do it. They wanted to rush it even more than DC did, and they failed miserably. So it was just up in the air, being well, what's of the Dark Universe now? But with it bombing, it just ultimately went nowhere, which completely sucks, because I really would have wanted to see that project go. But now all we get is just Blumhouse reboots of The Invisible Man and I think an upcoming Wolfman movie. So it's literally just up in the air. I doubt that that failure of a Mummy movie, or even the Dark Universe itself, will ever come back. If it does, they got to do it better, and they got to do it right. Because I really would have liked to have all of those classic Universal monster movies come back, and it's well, if they come back, are they going to fight each other? Are they going to team up against a bigger threat? What are they going to do? But again, we'll probably never know, unless you go into the multiverse and then you figure that out. But anyway, I did want to give one quick honorable mention too, since we're still on the topic of Universal monsters. Well, this wasn't part of it, but it just popped in my mind, where I guess you could technically say Van Helsing was kind of like that with Hugh Jackman, but I'm not going to get into that. I need to rewatch that movie though. But anyway, Werewolf by Night, which is a Marvel short film that's exclusive on Disney Plus. Back when, at the time, I was borrowing my mother's Disney Plus account, because I don't care to ever get any kind of streaming service. So anyway, but obviously Werewolf by Night, this was based on the Marvel Comics series, and I can definitely say when it came out, I really liked it. I thought it was really well done. It felt like all those old age classic Universal monster movies, and just the feel and the way that the film looked, and just the feeling, the setting, and even just the ambience and everything about it just felt really good and really classically horror about it. It looked really cool, and the werewolf was really cool too. And spoiler alert, it had probably one of my favorite somewhat obscure Marvel characters, the Man-Thing. I thought he was really cool, and even better to discover too was that not only was he some of it was CG, but also some of it was practical effects. So I can definitely appreciate that. Practical effects, in my opinion, are much better looking than CG, because it just makes sense when there's something right in front of the camera and you can definitely tell that it's right there. Now, anyway, we'll just move on from that. So obviously, I think that with the crossover films with the Marvel series and all those that came out after Marvel was successful at the time, I definitely feel like it started with Freddy vs. Jason. Now, of course, ever since the Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th franchises came out, and being movie after movie after movie, was coming out and all that stuff. Everybody was thinking, oh, what would happen if these guys fought each other and all that stuff. It was first hinted at the very end of Jason Goes to Hell, that Freddy and Jason would fight. Now, obviously, if you can even sit through that abysmal mess, there's like an ending, the ending of that movie where it shows, Jason's mask is in the dirt. Then all of a sudden, Freddy's claw comes up and it like drags Jason's mask down, basically indicating that Freddy versus Jason will happen. Because when Freddy versus Jason was made, this time instead of Paramount, it was distributed by New Line Cinema, which basically they have the rights to the Friday the 13th franchise and character of Jason this time. But of course, Jason Goes to Hell is a complete mess, and I absolutely hate it, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people do, because of how completely far from any of the other Friday the 13th movies it is. But they literally had to wait like 10 years later until they made one other Nightmare on Elm Street movie and another Jason movie, Jason X, until they were able to finally make Freddy vs. Jason. Now, I believe that this was also the first Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street movie I saw, obviously because it's a crossover movie. Why wouldn't you want to see it? Even though I'd still like it, mainly with like the fighting scenes, it's not perfect. Obviously, it's like very badly written with the horrible characters that you really don't give a crap about, which is ironic because Ronnie Yu was the same person who worked on Bride of Chucky, making some human characters that nobody cared about and they were just horribly written. Same goes for these human characters here. We don't care about any of these guys. We just want to see Freddy and Jason fight. And we do finally get that. We do get plenty of fight scenes, both in like the dream world where Freddy's more powerful and in the real world where Jason's more powerful. So I think that the movie holds up mainly just in those. But as for like the actual story with all these characters and stuff, nobody cares. Nobody cares at all. But other than that, I still think Freddy vs. Jason is a worthy promise of the title. And as for like, is it? I guess the other question would be like, is it better than Jason Goes to Hell and all those other ones? Well, yeah, it's definitely better than Jason Goes to Hell, and 1,000 times better than Jason Takes Manhattan for sure. But again, it's just like if there's like one Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street movie you think is better than that, then there you go. So yeah. Now, of course, with that coming out, then there was Alien vs. Predator. Obviously, that's been in the talks ever since Predator 2 came out, where like the ending of it had like the trophy of skulls in that Predator ship. Obviously, you would see like a xenomorph skull in the background. You'd see it there and be like, oh wait, look at that! That's the alien skull and all that stuff. That's been talked about ever since. And then there was like video games of Alien vs. Predator. There was the Dark Horse comics of Alien vs. Predator. People have been waiting for that as long as we've been waiting for RoboCop versus Terminator, and we still don't have that yet. But eventually, we would finally get Alien vs. Predator. Now, of course, that film is not canon at all towards the Alien franchise nor the Predator franchise. It's just a non-canon existing in its own universe type of thing. Now, it's been a while since I saw it, but I think the movie is just okay. Again, it's kind of suffers from the same stuff that Freddy vs. Jason kind of suffers from, where it's like there's all these characters you don't know, just all these new characters you don't know the names of, you won't remember the names of, you don't necessarily care about. You just want to see the Alien and Predators fight. That's all. But again, it's just like, it delivers what it promises. It does have some pretty good action sequences with the Alien and Predator. I think that the movie is just okay at the same time. I really don't think I should have any indication or any, I really don't think I should indicate any further of how the sequel, Requiem, absolutely sucks. And I'll be honest, it is one of the biggest abominations mankind that I feel like it never should have existed. And I really never want to see it in my life ever again. And if I do, I will probably nail a bunch of nails into my eyes. Anyway, basically my point is that Alien vs. Predator Requiem is bad. The only weird thing about it was obviously the ending from the first one and the recurring villain, or whatever you want to call it, of the Xenopredator or Predalien or whatever the heck it's called. Just basically like an alien morphed with a predator. Pretty much. That's about it. It's kind of interesting, but I don't know. But yeah, that's about it. So now we're just getting into like a couple of the obscure type of things, mainly with like the Full Moon franchise. If you're not familiar with Full Moon, they're like low budget horror production company where they basically make a whole bunch of direct to video movies that may not be a great story and quality wise, but it's just one of those like guilty pleasure type of movies where it's like, if you want to see this weird schlocky movie about like a killer cookie man or these zombie strippers or these strippers fighting zombies or whatever the heck, then well, you got Full Moon Productions. So I figured one of the crossovers of the movies that they've done was Doll Man versus Demonic Toys. Now, Doll Man, that kind of goes back a couple ways, but Doll Man kind of had his own movies. He's basically like a little small, I guess 6-inch sized man who's like basically like a cop, if I'm remembering correct. I have the movie, but I didn't really watch it all the way through. I don't know, I guess it didn't it seem like it was my type of thing. But for whatever reason, he decided to cross over with the Demonic Toys movie. And Demonic Toys on its own, I think is just okay. I mean, it's a horror movie. I mean, what else do you expect? It's basically about demonic toys that come to life because, possessed by a demon, blah, blah, blah. So there is that. I don't really remember a whole lot from it, but it's basically like, I don't know. I haven't even seen Small Soldiers, but basically it's like if like a man were to fight giant-sized toys, and that's about all I could say about it. Then, of course, even though Full Moon didn't really have anything to do with this one, it's still a crossover movie where it has Puppet Master versus Demonic Toys. Now, Puppet Master obviously is like a staple, iconic franchise of Full Moon Productions. Now, of course, unfortunately, it doesn't have every single puppet that's in the Puppet Master movies. It only has like 4. And the same can be said for Demonic Toys, where it has like 3 or 4 characters in there. And it's not necessarily it's not a good film at all. But it's interesting just to see the puppets and the demonic toys fight each other, though. And I guess it's interesting to note, too, that Corey Feldman and Vanessa Angel are both in the movie as well. But, again, I think it's just one of those movies that's like, yeah, it's a crossover movie, it's a horror movie, and it's like a Christmas-themed movie, too. But at the same time, it's like, is it really that, worth seeing? I don't know. Anyway, so then, of course, I think the last thing I'll talk about is just the MonsterVerse. Obviously, with King Kong versus Godzilla coming out in the 60s, 1962, and of course having it released here in America in 63, huge success all over the world. Biggest crossover ever of all time, ever since Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. This was my first Godzilla and Kong movie. It was one of my first movies ever. It's a movie I'll hold till the day I die, blah, blah, blah. I talked about it many times before. And of course, with the MonsterVerse, there's been like so many talks over the years, ever since then, of like, Godzilla and Kong meeting back together. You'd see it in comics, you'd see it referenced in movies and such. It's just like, when will they be able to fight again? Because like obviously, Kong's rights are held by another company, and Godzilla's over here in his own company, just like waiting, chilling in the background. After the success of the 2014 reboot, there's been talks about like, Kong maybe merging with Godzilla eventually, and then out comes Kong Skull Island, and then it indicates that it's now a shared MonsterVerse, basically. Of course, this was trying to capitalize on the success of both Marvel and DC, mainly of just like Marvel, because even when DC did it, they were kind of in a rush to be like, oh, there's this whole crossover timeline thing with Marvel and their their characters. They're crossing over. We need to rush this out because like all we have is Man of Steel. We got to get Batman versus Superman out and all that stuff. So yeah. Anyway, so then there was Godzilla King of the Monsters, which I think was a lot better than the 2014 movie. And then about a couple years later, and 2020 being a 2020 piece of crap later, we finally get Godzilla vs. Kong, which we waited for so long. Because, like, ever since it was announced and we were still waiting for it and it was teased so many times, at the time, all we had was just, like, announcements, teases, freaking banners. All we had was nothing but banners. It's like, nobody gave a crap about the banners of Godzilla vs. Kong. It's like, show us a movie poster or a release date, and we would get some action figures eventually, too, but at the same time, it's like, why banners? nobody cares about. But I swear there was like 6 or 7 different variations of the banner. It's like different colors of this. It was like first it was like black and white, then it showed like I don't really remember, but it was like a different color, and then eventually it was like orange bluish or like orange purple or something like that. But there were like so many different variations of all these banners, and that was all we got for any news for the longest time. Again, this was like at the very beginning of 2020, I think it was, or towards the end of 2019, something like that. But again, that was all we got. But of course, with 2020 being 2020, that got delayed for about a year. And it was probably for the best, because if I'm remembering correctly, there was like some of the special effects CG work that needed to be touched up and redone. And I think it was probably for the best, because the CG in it looks pretty good. Because it's like if you look at the close-ups of like Godzilla and Kong, when they show their close-ups of their face, it looks really good. The detail in it looks really, really good. It looks amazing. So, yeah, and then obviously about a couple years later, we would get yet another sequel, Godzilla X Kong, The New Empire, and I thought that was pretty good. It was pretty entertaining. So, yeah. So now the only question indicates, like, will there be any other crossover movies in the horror franchise? Will we ever get, will we ever get any more new Universal monsters? Will they ever collide again? Will they ever meet up or fight again? Will we ever get something similar to the Monster Squad? Will Freddy and Jason ever fight again? Or will we get like a completely different slasher franchise, different slasher franchises teaming up and fighting each other? Will we ever get Jason versus Michael Myers? Will we ever get Chucky versus Michael? Will we ever get this versus that? Will we ever get Terminator versus RoboCop? Will we ever get this and that? It's just a matter of time until, different companies realize, well, wait, we can make a lot of money from doing this, blah, 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 blah. But again, we don't know. All we can do is just hope and wait. But of course, after Avengers Endgame, I think pretty much everybody's just like done with crossovers. We're sick of crossovers. We've seen it too many times done before. We're tired of this. We're tired of that. We just want to see different stuff. We just want to see new stuff. I don't think we want to deal with it. It's like, I get that. Because, crossovers were good at the time, but now it's getting old. The multiverse is getting old. All this lazy writing is just getting really old. We want something new. We want something different. But at the same time, it's like, the fans are demanding something, so it's like, listen to the fans. Listen to what they want rather than stuff that nobody asked for. But apparently people don't seem to get that. It just makes more sense to be like, Deadpool and Wolverine. I guess you could say that's like another crossover that's been waiting for a long time. That was a huge success, and people have been waiting for that. And that's another good example of a movie that people wanted and requested for the longest time, and when you actually give people something that they want, it's a big success. So that's that. So, I guess I should answer the question, like, what was my favorite crossover out of the majority of these? I really do like the Monster Squad. Obviously, it was one of my favorite horror franchises, or one of my favorite horror movies. I watch about every now and then, or every year around Halloween. Freddy vs. Jason's another one. Alien vs. Predator, I don't watch it too much really. And, Godzilla vs. Kong, or even King Kong vs. Godzilla. It just depends on my mood, really. So, yeah. So what are some crossovers that you guys want to see? Because, there's a lot out there, and lots of the stuff is just Godzilla vs. Gamera would be one we obviously really would like to see, but we doubt that'll ever happen. It's like they kind of merge with each other, but it was like with a mobile game and such. But anyway, that's a story for another day. But that does it for this episode of Useless Nerdy Knowledge. So I'll see you guys next time. You have a happy Halloween.